Hello and welcome to the episode 20 of the Developers and Podcast, where we talk about everything in the games industry, but from the eyes of two indie devs. My name is Siavash, aka Rainy, and the co-host is Sydney, aka Fem, over here. Today we're back on another episode of How to Indie, and this time we are just going to talk about pre-production and your game design. We wanted to kind of delve into what game design entails. So even if you're not an indie dev and you're just interested in this industry of ours, then stick around because we're going to explain what game design means. It's surprising because sometimes, especially when talking to like family, they don't understand what game design means. They kind of immediately think it's art. But it's like so not that.
It's so not art. I mean, well, okay,
art dictates it, but
yeah, but like, it's not art in like the traditional like I'm drawing stuff. That's
exactly.
Really funny.
Yeah. So we just kind of wanted to talk about what game design is, and but more importantly, if you are currently working on a game, don't worry, this isn't going to be a waste of your time of a podcast. We are going to talk about what steps we recommend for you to follow, or kind of we wish would have followed when it comes to pre-production and game design. So yeah, I mean,
pre-production we didn't do.
Yeah, game design in general. If we want to kind of just get into it, what is game design? Game design, well, in general, it just means designing the different aspects of a game that your player will be engaging with. Or just has to exist for the game to work. Now, that is such a blanket statement, but that is by choice because game design influences every aspect of the game. If you want a more granular answer from the start of a game, especially, because it's a step-by-step kind of thing, like what parts game design influences and how you kind of follow these steps. But from the start of it, it's really the core idea, the setting of the game, and the core mechanics of the game. Those are some things you have to design. For example, a super simple thing that you will have to design is the gameplay loop. What is going to be the main thing that the players are going to do when they play your game and engage with it? If it's a platformer, it's going to be jumping from one platform to another. Do you want to add wall riding and wall climbing to it? There you go. Now you have another gameplay loop that kind of defines how your puzzles are going to be created or how your level design is going to be created. The most important thing to keep in mind is that these core mechanics will define how for example, level design is put together, or your setting or genre will define how the narrative is structured or written, or what themes you're going to be using. So it's very important to follow it in a very kind of structured manner, but as it is game design, don't worry, you can always jump back and forth. But it is always good to define one thing and then go to the next one.
You know, I love a good metaphor.
Yeah.
I think metaphors are great for teaching.
Hit us
so
with
this
one,
just kind of okay, something that I think most of us can relate to is think of it as, you know, let's say you wanted to redesign the house that you're living in. Okay, let's say you're building a house from scratch. We all live in houses, or most of us do at least. So, you know, when you wake up in the morning and you walk to your kitchen or you walk to your bathroom or you interact with different parts of your house, right? I think all of us can relate to like being frustrated with how our houses are laid out. Mm-hmm. Like, this is in a stupid spot, or I wish this was bigger, or I wish there wasn't some dumb corner I had to turn in order to get to my kitchen, or, you know, I hit my shin on my bed every morning or whatever, right? So I think all of us have kind of dreamed a little bit about like, okay, if I had a perfect house, you know, what would I do? I'd get rid of that dumb wall, or I'd put a window in here or whatever. So I think we can all kind of relate to the idea of like, let's design our own house.
Yeah.
So if you were to design your own house, the very first thing you need to decide is, where are we going to put it?
Yeah.
Right? Where do I want to live? Do I want to live in the UK? Do I want to live in the Pacific Northwest? Do I want to live in Germany? Do I want to live in the desert? Do I want to live in the savannah, the jungle, whatever? So your first step is your setting, really, is where is this game going to take place? What's happening? What do I want the player to interact with? Do I want the platformer Metroidvania feel? Do I want it to be horror? Do I want it to be cozy? Do I want it to be under the water? Whatever. So you've got your setting, right? And then from there, you have to consider the foundation of your house. What's it going to kind of be built out of? Do I want it to be like a stucco house? Do I want it to be the southwestern, like adobe style? Or do I want like a classic British brick and mortar? Or do I want a basement? Do I want 3 levels? Do I want 1 story that's spread out over big space? So it's kind of the same thing. You have to consider from the beginning, middle, and end, how am I going to put this all together? So, you know, if we continue the metaphor with a house, you have your basic structure, you have your foundation, you have to put the frame together, before you even get to any of that, you have to put together blueprints and the layout, right? How do I want my rooms to be set up? Where do I want my kitchen and compared to my bathroom, my closet? Do I want a walk-in closet? Whatever. So there's a lot of like little granular things you have to go through. It's not as simple as, like we talked about last week, like click button, get game. Like it's not really that easy. So I think that's kind of the foundation of the game design idea is you have to consider every aspect of it and how it all interacts with each other and how the gamer or the person living in the house is going to interact with everything. Yeah. Right. And so,
I mean, these.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, these different areas that you're going to have to kind of make decisions about, they all influence each other. Now, there is a recommended sort of path to follow, but like I said, it doesn't mean that you can't go back and change something for the sake of something else. Like I said, the traditional way is to have the genre and setting first, and then go to the narrative. But if you're in the process of narrative, and then you kind of come up with this really great idea and you want to have this very specific set piece, nothing means you can't go back and change the genre. And
as long as you're in that blueprinting, as long as you're in that blueprinting phase where you're just designing, I'm going to keep going back to this house reference. So, you know, I've got my graph paper and I'm drawing the layout of my house. You know, if I decide I suddenly want to face a different direction or be a different shape, it's as easy as erasing the lines and continuing forward. But once you get into the system, you start programming. As soon as you start actually building the frame of the house, as soon as you start putting together the framework in engine of what your game is going to look like, that's when you're going to start hitting some limitations. In terms of like, okay, this is already set. I can't really mess with this anymore.
I mean, we're kind of jumping around a lot, but I mean, that's really... There's no better way to show how crazy game design is in general. But if there's one great kind of tip I can give to everyone is that consider those changes when it comes to implementation, because there is almost never going to be a case where your design is going to one-to-one translate to an implementation.
Never.
You're either going to hit some limitation that requires you to downscale something, or you're going to end up implementing something even better than you thought you would, and now you want to expand on that system, so you're going to have to go back and kind of adjust things around and give more time to something that actually ended up working a lot better than you thought it did. So be flexible. Be very flexible. I mean, if this is a discussion we've had a lot with people in our publishing company, Merge, that game making is one of the most kind of flexible things you can produce, because of just how many parts have to work together. Everything can influence each other and everything can change everything.
Now, the pre-production part of it is still, I think, the most important. Because you're going to be answering all of those questions before you're hitting the point where you can't really change things without breaking other stuff. So similar to making a blueprint for a house, you want to take the time and really consider as many questions as you possibly can before you start laying the actual framework. Now, that's not to say that, you know, you're not going to run into instances while creating it where you're going to want to change things. Again, similar to a house. You start putting the frame together and go, oh, that doesn't look the way in 3D I thought it would. Maybe we want the door to move over or something like that. And you have that flexibility to do that when you're making a game. But you want to lay out as many of those ideas as possible, as fast or as soon as possible, so that you can see how everything interacts with everything else. And so when it comes to starting the game design process, it kind of is just asking yourself a lot of questions. And I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this for me, for fun, something I just want to share with my friends or share with people, whatever, or is it something I want to sell? Because if it's something that you're just making for yourself, do whatever you want. Like, it doesn't matter. If it's something you want to sell, then the answers to your questions are going to be a lot more important than if you're just screwing around and making a game for yourself. So for the sake of argument, let's assume throughout this whole discussion that we're talking about making a game that you plan on selling, because it'll make things a little easier. So if you plan on selling this game, the next real question you need to ask yourself is, does this game already exist somewhere else? This idea that I have, has somebody already done it? Because if somebody's already done it, then you might want to be reconsidering either if you want to still do that, or how are you going to make yours unique enough that people will buy yours and not theirs, or maybe both, whatever. So that's kind of the first thing is, you know, I think we all have tons of ideas for games. If you make games, you have ideas for games that you want to make. So like, for instance, when we were doing SunnySide, I'd had this idea randomly of like, how cool would it be to make a game where you just like design a fish tank?
Oh yeah.
Because like because I've had fish. If you've ever had fish, you know the best part about having fish is designing the fish tank. As soon as you put everything in and you have the fish tank, having fish sucks. It's constant cleaning and updating and testing and feeding, and it's not nearly as much fun as having a cat, because you can't pet it or play with it. It's just like this thing that you can look at. And so I had asked myself, like, what if you just had a video game where you could just design the fish tank and then look at it, and you don't have to worry about all the other crappy stuff? So, idea for a game, right? So then the next question was, I wonder if people have already made this game. So I started looking around, because honestly, I was like, that's a great idea. We could sell a bunch of those. But come to find out, there's a bunch of video games where you design a fish tank. I was not the first person to have that idea. So then it was, okay, well, could I do it any better than the rest of these people? The answer was no, so I abandoned the idea. Right? So that's kind of the process of, what's the game that I want to make? Somebody else made it. Could I do it better?
And there's one thing that I want to say here, and I think it's very important to keep in mind, is that don't be deterred too much when you see a similar piece of art out there. It doesn't have to be a game. If you're doing some writing, if you're drawing a character, because even if you're creating the exact same idea as somebody else for a game, for a book, at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, you are going to put your own spin on it. Because when you create that art, you're going to draw from your own inspirations, from your own life experiences, which I'm absolutely 100% sure is not the same as the person who created the other one. Whether it's a book, whether it's a video game or something like that. So don't let something like that hold you back. But like Sydney said, definitely be aware of it.
It's called market research.
Yeah. Don't put yourself in a vacuum. But again, at the end of the day, because it's something creative that you do, a video game is an art, so you are going to draw from your own inspirations and create something unique at the other end of it.
Yeah. So you know, let's say you've done the market research and you're like, okay, this idea that I have, nobody's really done it. I can't find anything that's like it. Okay, let's proceed. And you know, I guess the question, well, I think actually, let me backtrack. Where do you do your market research? Where do you look, right? Because there's Steam, which is an obvious one. There's Itch, you know, and then you've got all your consoles, and you, I guess, just go into the store really, and just look and see if people have it, and if they do exist. Let's say you find something similar. I like to go and look at like the community pages. And like, you know, how's the reception? Are people actually enjoying this kind of a game? Or
if people are complaining about something, how can you do it better?
How can you do that? Yeah, so that's something that we did when we were designing SunnySide. Is I went and looked at videos for other farming games, and like looked at like what are things people wish they had, and can we put that in our game? like natively to kind of give us that extra boost. So, and you know, obviously have it make sense and stuff, but yeah, you definitely want to see if it's out there, and then if there, because chances are there's going to be something similar. So your next question is really, how do you make it unique? How do you get yours to stand out? Is that putting your own art style on it? Is that changing the mechanics, giving people mechanics that they asked for that maybe don't exist in other games? You know, and I feel like when you're doing market research and you look at like the games that are out and the games that are popular, I feel like my suggestion would be, don't chase whatever the current fad is.
Yeah.
Like right now, you know, farming games became huge. And, you know, instead of us just putting out a cool, unique game, we're fighting for attention with 30, 40 other farming games that all came out in the last few years. So, you know, I don't think we need another Metroidvania game. Like, there are so many of those. And I mean, if you think you have a really great, unique take on that genre, awesome, do it. But you're going to have to do a ton of research.
I have a cheat
to look at all the other Metroidvania games to make sure you're not just reskinning.
Yeah,
you know,
I have a cheat. So I think it's something so simple, but I haven't seen a lot of people do it. But I think if you're looking for a cheat to help you kind of take a shortcut in coming up with uniqueness, fusions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, it can be in any aspect of the game, and it doesn't have to be 2 games either. It can be tons of games. You can grab different aspects from different games that you think work well, or you can grab different art styles. I give you 2 examples. One of them is for us, right? So we grabbed the funkiness of Persona and the way the story is told and mixed it with like Harvest Moon and obviously the farming aspect of it. And then we grabbed Fruits Basket as an example of storytelling and narrative to hit those points and how relationships are built. And then we use Yakuza for like the mini games and then how you traverse the city and stuff. So there's a tons of fusions. So that's one example of it, but you can do it even in smaller areas. For example, one thing that I like to do, and has become a pretty popular thing, is I like to mix stylized with realistic. If you look, there are tons of games out there that are pixel art, but then all of the glow effects, all the fog, all of the weather effects and stuff like that, they're super real, photorealistic. And that creates this kind of look that almost looks like a diorama, like you're looking at something that exists on a table in real life, but that's the game, that's the world. So fusions, incredibly powerful. And another benefit that fusions have is that you can look at the games that you are getting inspirations from and see how they have done it. It's not something vague that you're not sure how to approach. You can go and play it. So you can look at exactly how the animations are put together, how the frames are structured, how the user interfaces. So don't underestimate the power of fusions. I think fusions are a great cheat and a shortcut for you to make your idea a lot more unique and put a twist on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think...
Want to make a farming game that stands out amongst the sea of farming games? Make it horror. Add a horror element to it.
You know, I would have agreed with you, but now there's a lot of those too.
There's a lot of those too now.
There's a lot of those, yeah. I mean, you've got what we did, which is the Persona edition. I think, I feel like Farm Sim, I don't think I would recommend anybody do Farm Sim right now. There's, give it 10 more years and then maybe come back to it, because it's
do a genre that
flooded right now.
You're passionate about, not necessarily what's popular, because by the time you're done with your game, that genre is probably not going to be insurgent.
That's another thing to consider too, is, you know, if horror games are popular right now, you know, you don't want to just go make another horror game because everybody else is doing it. You want to,
if you like
look at the games that,
but
look at the games that inspire you. And the thing, you know, I tell everybody with SunnySide, we just made the game that we wanted to play. Really, we made the game that we couldn't find anywhere else, so we made it ourselves. And I think really that's the best advice, is if you can't find the game that you want to play, make it. You know, and don't go to other games and be like, well, you should have this, and this. Well, no, that's not that game. Make your own game. You know, if you want it, make it. and you have complete control over, those different aspects that you want to add, or the things that inspire you, or, we couldn't find a farming game that had like satisfying realistic farming, like the actual farming mechanic. And so that's why it's what we did, So same thing with the music or the environment that we wanted. So we made it. But when it comes to considering your game design, make the game you want to make. But also there are so many questions you have to ask yourself in those initial design processes. So we talked about, where do you want to build your house? What's the framework going to look like? How do you want the building to be laid out? Whatever. And similar to game design, what's your setting going to be? What's your genre going to be? What kind of world building are you going to use? We kind of cheated a little bit and set it in, a modern environment, but we set it in a place that we've never been to. So we still had to do a lot of research. So, you can either make what if you live in, I don't know, London, make a game that takes place in London, or to
it
make
helps
your life a little bit easier.
Research so much easier because you could just go walk around, take photos of places.
Don't do what we did. It was dumb.
There's something really cool. This is a bit of a tangent, but I saw something really cool. Somebody bought one of those scanners that are portable. Those rod scanners that you can move over a document and then scans it.
Yeah.
He grabbed one of those and he was in New York and he was going around and dragging it across different bits of wall or the tiles in the subway.
I saw that.
And he was grabbing that. I was like, that is such a good thing to grab reference or textures from and then just use. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. There was I think it was Game Dev Life, the comic.
Oh yeah.
And there was a comic of when we go travel and my friends want to take pictures of the scenery and I'm taking pictures of the tiles and the sand texture and all these little so you're always going to be researching. But so those are the questions that you really have to ask yourself is genre, setting. You want to think about art style, what do you have capabilities with? Do you want a 2D pixel art? Do you want something that's more 3D with a isolated camera? Do you want 3D camera? Do you want, what do you want your game to look like? What inspires you? You also have to consider things like, what kind of music and sound do you want? Do you want sound at all? Maybe you want to make a totally silent game because that's definitely a thing. Or maybe you want the game to be wrapped around the music and have it be more like a beat game. So there's a bunch of different options for you to consider there. You got to think about how big of a game you want and the scale of it. Do you want it to be a tiny little 2-hour game that people can play for a couple bucks, or do you want to be absolutely stupid like we were and make this insanely huge open world sandbox game that's going to take you 1 billion years to develop? And so you got to think about scalability. What do you have time for? And is the scale something that you can add to later? So let's say you make a small, tiny game, people really love it. Do you have the ability to add to it afterwards? That's something also to consider in your pre-production phases. And then obviously the main mechanics in the gameplay loop. What do you want people doing while they're playing this game? What's the beginning? What's the purpose? And what ends it? With us, we didn't really make an end because it's a sandbox and we want people to just farm their lives away forever. But maybe you want to make a platformer. What do you want the final platforming to be like? Do you want there to be a battle element? Is there going to be a final boss? Is there going to be a culmination to the story that you're trying to tell? Or how much does the story play into it? Is there story at all? A lot of these simulation games that you'll find don't even really have stories, or if they do, it's kind of useless and it's just plopped in there to tell tutorial. So there's a lot of questions you need to ask yourself, and you really need to take the time to sit down with either, if you want to old school it like we did, piece of paper and a pencil and write it all down, or you can use some of these really great designing systems. I think, is it Fire? What's the one used by writers in D&D? It's Fire something. modifier?
Or for like scripting a narrative and like connecting it together. I don't actually know. You talk about there was one called Twine.
Yeah, Twine is more like for the narrative aspect of it and moving dialogue along. But there's an actual, like, I forget what it's called, actually. Let me ask the person who introduced me to it.
While you're looking at that, there is there's another thing that I want to say is that any of these design stages of the game, especially if you're working with somebody else or if you have a team, do get those people involved, because especially when you're coming up with gameplay loops or things that need to, become reality, you are going to need to consult your programmer if that is possible to do to begin with. Or even if that's not the case, your programmer is going to have insight into what is even possible. So you might even come up with ideas that you didn't think was possible, but your programmer had this unique thing that he can implement for you, and now you can like design something around it. So
or even
always
problem solving.
Yeah, even problem solving. So always consult your specialists with what you can do in the design stages of the game. And if obviously Sydney went through a lot of it, and if it feels overwhelming, and it is, trust me, if there's any aspect of the game that you cannot for the life of you come up with, don't worry about it. You can make decisions later about it. Now, the sooner you can do that, the better.
I don't recommend it.
The less risk you're going to be taking. But also, don't worry about having to postpone it. Keep in mind, when you postpone a design for something, it is very likely that it's going to be cut, whether you like it or not, because you're going to reach the end of production and you're going to be like, oh God, this whole chapter was never designed to begin with. And then it's just going to have to get rid of it. But
I would actually completely disagree with the putting off designing things. I think as much as you can lay out the idea and the framework for it, I think you need to do it. At least get an idea of how do we want everything to work together. Because like you said, if you don't design it up frent, it's probably going to get cut out because it wasn't important enough to you to do it in the first place. And I think, I think Rainy and I both suffer from the ADHD aspect of, if it's not interesting, we don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so if it's not interesting to you the first time, you're not going to put the effort in to do it later. And then it's going to get to the point where you have to do it. You don't want to do it, and you're going to be dragging yourself. So if it's not interesting to you... And you don't want that to
happen to you towards the end of the project's lifetime when you're all burnt out. Yeah.
So if it's not interesting to you, cut it. Or find a different solution. Or, try to figure out a different way to do something similar. Or, definitely don't force yourself to do anything that you don't really want to do. Actually, here's a great example. When we were doing some of our first design talks for SunnySide, Rainy was talking about the fact that he really didn't want to create the animation for the watering can.
Yeah.
And I tell this story all the time. And so, we were having this discussion. He's like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I hate animation, So my response was, well, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. And then it was, well, we need a way to water plants. Okay, let's find a way to water plants that doesn't include you having to make animation. And that's how we came upon the idea for the hose, which was the best decision we ever made. Yeah. So it's things like that where it's your game. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And if it doesn't inspire you, then it shouldn't be in your game anyway. So find a better solution.
Yeah. That's how you come up with some of the most unique selling points of your game, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So now that said, if there are parts of it that overly inspire you and you end up chasing that at the detriment to the rest of the game, then you need to consider, well, maybe we need to just pull this out and make this into a different game later on, where I can really chase this down. Like Rainy, for instance, we should have just made a drone game where you race drones. That ended up being a much bigger part of our game development than I think it really needed to be.
Yeah.
And we probably could have taken there should have been a point where we stopped and said, okay, wait a second.
Yeah, if we want to.
Why is this so interesting? Yeah. And maybe we should make this like a different something that we come back to. Now, granted, the drone racing is fun in the game, but
if it didn't exist,
have taken that time and put it somewhere else?
Nobody would have missed it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so even though we were really passionate about it and you were really excited about it, we could have still done it just in a different way that was separate from the development for this game. So you also have to be very pragmatic and realistic about that kind of stuff. So especially when designing a game, if you want to look at like what not to do, really great example is something like is it Dream World? Right? Dream World?
Right,
that was the one from
the game.
And it was like, we want you to be able to do literally everything all in this one game. And okay, cool. But you're going to run into some issues. 1, scalability. 2, feature creep. 3, production costs. 4, do people really want all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
For playing in like one big game, do you want to have 13 different environments that have no cohesion and make absolutely no sense? If that's what you're trying to go for, if what you're going for is like absolute chaos nonsense, then that's the whole point of your game, and you need to design it around that. But if the whole point of the game is we just want to give everybody everything they've ever asked for, that's just not realistic. And so you need to step back and go, okay, is this something that we really want to do? What's the point? And so then we go back to, what's the game loop? What's the purpose? What's the beginning, middle, and end? And it's all those questions that we kind of talked about before.
Yeah.
So,
and the good thing is the more of this you have structured, think of it as a Lego set. The more of it you have structured, you can just go back and kind of look at as a reference, and if you have more questions, your answers previously can continue to answer the questions in the future too. So whatever answer you gave to the core mechanic at some point can then define the answers to the detailed question that you might have further later on about how something should be implemented. And
I think the last piece of advice I would say, that something that where we kind of failed was, making like small tech demos of the different mechanics that you want. Work on them and make sure that they work and that the idea that you have is feasible. And in doing that, you really have to consider scalability. So yes, okay, this little system that we designed, it works for this one thing that we're putting in it. But what about these 100 other things that we want to use as content to bulk it out? And is it going to make sense when we try to scale it up? And that was an issue that we ran into, is we had quite a few systems that you had to reprogram because they weren't scalable with how they were programmed. So you really want to consider the scalability aspect of things and make sure that, for instance, again, we want, if I'm comparing with SunnySide, we want every character to have a portrait while talking, and we want them to have facial expressions, and we want their outfits to match the season. Okay, well, in theory, that's great, but you just described 12 months of work for one artist. So, and especially if you're just having one person, that's fine. But think about that across 32 characters. How scalable is it, and how realistic is it for you to multiply that up? Right? So it was, we wanted like full branching dialogue. And then we realized we have 32 characters. That's not realistic. We can't scale that. We wanted to have like proximity, similar to Stardew, where like you walk in, it triggers a cutscene. Cool idea. But if every single character gets 10, 12, 15 of those across 32 different characters, it's not scalable anymore. So the mistake that we made was how many characters we had. Because we didn't consider that we would have to scale for that with everything. So it's similar to like with the crops. I really wanted a ton of different crops. I didn't consider the scalability of that connected to the cooking system. And how having, an extra 10 crops meant an extra 100 recipes you're going to have to put in to make those make sense. So you really have to consider the scalability of everything that you're doing and make sure that either you can do it or you have people that can do it for you, and that you have the ability. Rainy, for instance, had this very particular idea for an art style before you ever had the artist
Yeah.
to actually do it for you.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? And so I think a lot of what we learned is the like, you know, how to kind of rein in your dreams a little bit. Rainy got lucky in that we found the right people, but you wanted this whole big narrative, but you didn't have a writer.
Yeah.
Until I came along and filled that hole. So be realistic about what you can do, the people you know you have access to, if you do have a team, what they're capable of. And don't design anything that you can't produce, I guess. Don't be like Rainy. That's our message.
We do have a lot more to talk about when it comes to obviously just how to indie in general, but pre-production as well. But we're going to end that episode on there. As always, these episodes of How to Indie, we don't do an extended version. We just release it as is so that everybody can have access to it. But we do an extended version of our bi-weekly episodes where we talk about everything in the industry and like the latest news and stuff. And for those, you can follow us and support us on Patreon down below. All of the episodes of the podcast, however, do get released on a Monday over on Patreon versus the Thursday that they come out of. So if you want early access to those, feel free to do that as well down below. And just in general, it goes a long way. It supports us directly. Because setting a game goes through so many more levels of things that you have to pay before you even make a penny out of it. Maybe one day we can talk about finances of SunnySide. But thank you so much for listening to us.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
I got an answer. It was Campfire Writing. It was called Campfire.
Is that the software or program?
It's a website. Yeah, it's a website. And it's great. It helps you with like world building, with deciding, like putting together your character profiles. You can use it for like D&D campaigns if you want to.
What is it called?
It's called Campfire.
Just Campfire.
Campfire, yeah. Campfire Writing.
Oh, Campfire Writing. Oh, yeah, Campfire Writing. Okay, I'm actually going to look at that for my own stuff. Hell yeah.
Well, I want to do it for the studio at some point. So,
nice.
But yeah, check it out for all the stuff that we just talked about for planning what your game is going to look like for general game design. Campfire is a great resource for you. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And with that, we will see you next week on stuff in the industry. Take care.
Bye, guys.